Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
We are back here with Kate Panaccione, and she is an amazing professional and a person who helps so many people. The name of her company, Square Peg Consulting. We want to welcome you back to the show today, Kate. How are you?
Thanks, Jill. Hi, I'm fine. I hope you're well too.
I am. Would you mind explaining what Square Peg actually does?
Sure. What Square Peg is I have a consulting company for special education matters. What that means is anything related to special education, that's my area of expertise. So I'm hired sometimes by government agencies. It could be a state. I'm sometimes hired to develop training programs or to work on some of the policies that states have regarding special education. Yeah. I'm sometimes hired by attorneys because there's often litigation that goes with special education, either because children that have special needs have been injured somewhere, or perhaps it's because a child that requires specific services in the school district, the parents might not feel they're getting them, so they hire an attorney and litigate that. So I'm hired often by attorneys. And also I work sometimes with parents. Parents might call me up and just ask for assistance for smaller tasks, like perhaps in reviewing their child's IEP to see if it's appropriate and if I think that it has everything that should be included. So I work for anybody that has issues concerning special education.
Great. And would you mind telling us your forms of contact, please?
Sure. You can reach me on my website, which is www.squarepeged. That's squarepeged.com. And if you'd like to email me personally, you can just contact me at kate@squarepeged.com.
Great. Now let's start with special education in general. Who is special education really for?
Special education is for children that have learning disabilities. It's important to understand that. The federal government has laws. That's all special education is it's a set of laws designed to protect children and to support children in becoming independent. So special education is only for children that are identified as having a disability in one of 13 categories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, people often don't understand that, but the federal government has outlined in law what those categories are. And in order for a child to receive special education, which is simply direct instruction, that means the child needs to be taught in a specific way to understand information.
Okay, well, how does someone know if their child has a disability? Could you explain a little bit how it works, maybe?
Sure. Usually what happens is somebody in the child's life notices that something's amiss. It could be a parent, even before a child goes to school, a parent might notice that their baby isn't sitting up the way they would expect it to. Sometimes pediatricians notice that a child isn't developing at the same rate that their peers are. So if it happens before school age, that's covered under a different set of laws.
Okay.
Yeah, so if a child is between birth and 3 years old, they're covered under early childhood. And what that means is that if a child has difficulties with development, typically a therapist goes into the home and helps work with the parents to help encourage that child along. If the child is 3 to 5 years old, they're covered under early childhood special education.
Okay.
And that means that they often go to preschool and they have a plan designed to help them hopefully catch up to where they need to be when they start school.
All right. So what happens if now someone thinks that their child or, someone in the family's child has a disability? What happens next? What do you do?
Well, anybody can refer a child for special education. And so that's birth through 21. That's what the age span is that law covers.
Okay.
So anyone, it could be a family member, it could be a teacher, it could be a physician, anyone that sees that a child seems to be developing differently than their peers can call a school district and say, I know a child that I think might be having learning problems or maybe isn't developing the way they should be developing. Every school district is required by law to do something called child find. What that means is it's a school district's responsibility to go out and look for children that are struggling. Because the earlier research shows, the earlier that we intervene, the better the outcome in the long run.
So are these individuals that are in classrooms walking around to look at students in school, or you just mean in the public? Child find specifically? Just curious. I'd never heard of that.
Yeah, what child find is it's for everybody. Sometimes when children reach school age, special education is usually noticed by teachers. If it hasn't been caught before, by parents or by doctors or family members, then it usually gets noticed by teachers. And that might be that a child doesn't have the ability to, they may have an issue with the way they speak. Mm-hmm. Or they might have, a teacher might notice that a child doesn't see the board very well, that they can't read and they're always moving closer. There's certain hallmarks that educators are trained to pick up on during their teacher training. I think sometimes the public doesn't realize how involved it is for teachers to get certified. There's a lot of training that goes into understanding how children learn, how they best learn. There's all kinds of research. It's a research-driven field. It's not just based on that instinct of I'm a good teacher.
Mm-hmm. So now what if your child or someone's child is getting that extra help and doesn't seem to still be keeping up? What would the next step be? That's
when they get referred for special education, and that means that they have testing done. Well, the first thing that they would do actually is they just try teacher tips, that toolbox that teacher has. They try the extra help. They try moving a child closer to the board. They try offering them a little bit of extra time. They offer them the supports that they need. They might get extra help in reading if they're having trouble reading. And teachers keep data on all of that. That's what the grading system is for. It's not because they want to say some kids are smarter than others. It's because they need to track how much child is learning to make sure they're doing their job correctly. So they try interventions like that first.
Okay.
And they go from there.
Now, what do parents do if the school says they want to evaluate their child because, they think something is wrong in a sense? There may be a disability. Could you explain that? Do they have to agree with what the school says?
Yes, they don't have to agree. Parents actually are given a lot of rights under the law. Parents have the right to decide what's best for their children. Before a school district can even begin to think of evaluating, they need parents' permission to evaluate them, to test them, to see if they might be behind in any areas. So all of the categories of special education have some kind of standardized forms to be able to test to see if a child falls within an average. So let's say that a child, let's pick one I'll give an example of, like, if a child has attention issues, that's not something that you can test with a blood test. It's not a medical thing that you can see easily. It shows up because they can't pay attention in class, or they can't get their work done, or they can't get started, or they blurt out answers. So it doesn't have a blood test, but there is standardized assessments for that. So school districts give those standardized assessments. That's also part of my work sometimes. School districts hire me to do assessments especially if the assessments are complicated cases where a child might have multiple disabilities, or maybe they can't pinpoint what's getting in the way of a child learning. And so they might hire me to come in and do a really comprehensive evaluation to determine, why is it that this child is struggling? What's getting in the way?
Got it. Well, it's funny. Last night I spent filling out, my son is going into pre-K. He's 4, right? So I had to fill out the registration packet for him. And my other son's 6. So it dawned on me, I remembered this other questionnaire about language. What language does your child speak? What does he read? What does he write, if he does read or write? And it leads me to the next question in regards to, what about those children out there who, English, let's say, is their second language? So they're not understanding the teacher as well. They're not able to, because it's not being spoken in the home. Is that considered a disability, or what is that considered?
Good question. It's not considered a disability. That is simply a child not knowing a language.
Okay.
It doesn't mean anything other than that. Now, that doesn't mean that children that don't speak English as their first language, some of them do have disabilities. But what we find, and this is across the United States, is that children who don't have homes, at home they don't speak English, those children are referred for special education services more often than you would expect.
Got it.
So what happens is teachers, I think, sometimes lack the experience or the knowledge in working with children that don't speak English as a first language. And so what they say is, I don't know how to teach this child. They must have something wrong with them. And so let's take them to special education. Well, there's nothing wrong with any child. That's not what special education is. It doesn't label children smart or not smart. It doesn't label them as motivated or not motivated, or having manners or having no manners. That's not what it is.
Yeah.
So children that English isn't their first language, we really need to be careful to make sure that it's not just a language barrier.
Got it. I don't know if I shared this with you last time about my son, who's now 6, when he was going into pre-K. I know I've told the story. I'm not sure if it was you, but he went into pre-K 2 years ago. And within like 2 weeks, the teacher calls me, and not even kindly, like it was, we need to talk. Your son has a problem. And I'm like, what's wrong? And just her delivery was not the best form for a teacher. I was shocked. Well, he cannot hold a pencil. He cannot use scissors. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I never knew I had to work on those things. My first kid, how do I know that I'm supposed to be writing with him before school? He didn't go to daycare. He didn't. So maybe he is a lot, behind the other students, but you know what? I'm like, he draws. I never gave him a pencil to write. I never gave him a scissor to cut. So she put me into a panic mode, but the way she came off, it was very wow, he needs help now. We got to get him started. And so I went down this process of the special education route. By the time you got the appointment with the district, by the time we took him to a therapist to do the play therapy, the psychological evaluation, he was writing fine. He was cutting fine. So it was nice to hear her a few months later say, yeah, I was wrong. He just didn't know the skills. I said, I know, as a parent, I was just trying to tell you that. I'm sorry. My bad. I didn't know I needed to work on these skills before he went to school. I thought school taught him these things. Simple mistake. But the way she came across wasn't so compassionate, which to this day really bothered me. It would have been nice for her to say, hey, I'm noticing that Austin is, lacking a little bit in this department. Do you work with him on this? Or, oh, you haven't? I understand. Not a problem. We're going to work on this. And if it seems to be an issue, there was no compassion like that. So it really hurt me as a parent and put a sour taste in my mouth for her and that school. But so in the end, I kind of felt better knowing that he was fine and he's excelling now as a kindergarten, well, soon to be first grader. But yeah, that's another important thing. I think, you to pray for having a good teacher who's kind about it in the right way.
Yeah. Teachers are under a lot of pressure and stress. And sometimes, you know what, I've been an educator for over 30 years, and I'm sure there were times that I was less than effective. Simply because we're all human.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes teaching is extremely difficult when you have a classroom of, so many children needing you all at once. That's something that experience builds, that teachers that have a lot of experience learn that.
Mm-hmm.
So while that happens sometimes, hopefully as a child progresses throughout their education and they have different educators, they'll find the ones that work really well with them.
Good.
Now,
Yep.
one year they might have one that nobody likes.
Yeah. Exactly. It happens. So what about children who you find have just a hard time like in one area? Could they get along in the regular classroom if they could just sit closer, look at the board, or, what happens with that, if you don't mind?
Those are called accommodations. And what an accommodation means is it's a support that they need, but it could be offered to anybody in the classroom. It's actually not part of special education law. That's part of the American with Disabilities Act.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's ADA. So children that have special education often require both. So they need direct instruction in whatever area they're having difficulty. Maybe they need help reading or doing math or whatever it might be. But they might also need accommodation where when they read, a teacher might give them a special window that reduces the amount of text to just one line so they're not overwhelmed. That's an accommodation.
Okay.
The teacher could offer that to anyone in the classroom and it would be okay. But there are some children that require accommodations.
Okay.
But they may not need special education. For example, children that are diabetic.
Oh.
A child that's diabetic may not have any problems learning. However, if their sugar is too high or too low in their bodies, their mind may not function the same way. They may lose the ability to focus.
Mm-hmm.
So we can offer those children accommodation. That's under 504, it's called, in schools. So what they get instead is maybe they get to have a snack at a prescribed time of day. And that's something that teachers do anyway. Teachers always keep a jar of peanut butter and crackers in their drawer for those children that missed breakfast. Mm-hmm. But that's an accommodation that some children have to be able to learn.
Got it. And what happens when a child that has a special education graduate, can they go to college? Do they get the same degree? Or what happens if you're in the special education loop, in a sense, for all those years? What happens in the end? Do you still get that diploma, or is it something different?
Yeah, this is another part of the law that gets really complicated sometimes. And each state has their own rules around it. But what it really generally is, if you think about it overall, children with special education have the same rights to everything else. Their rights do not go away because they go somewhere else. However, the requirements under the law after they graduate from high school is that it switches over from special education law to just the American with Disabilities Act. Okay, so colleges, well, if a child has the ability to function and learn in a college level classroom, and all they need to be able to do so is to sit closer to the board or to have somebody take notes for them, just one of those accommodations, they're entitled to the accommodations. They are no longer entitled to everything that's allowable under special education, because states feel that when children graduate, that's when they're transitioning to the adult world. Some children graduated at 18, and some children stay in school until they're 21. That's the most states use the age 21. That's the age that most states consider a person an adult. So if a child has enough of an impact on their learning that they need to be in school even longer, they can stay till 21.
Okay.
Those that graduate at 18 should be able to have all of the opportunities that everybody else has.
Now, what if you still have, for example, and I'm referring to my own nephew who's in a special education program. He was held back twice. He's now going into, it's going to be eighth grade or ninth grade. I get confused. But anyway, so my sister was saying that she doesn't think he'll be able to go to college with his anxiety, with his disability, even though she says he can get like a GED or some type of certificate instead. What are those other alternatives for those with disabilities that cannot function at a normal, standardized level? Not, I shouldn't say normal, to go to college. So what are the options for those children out there? What can they do?
Well, it's our responsibility as educators and under the law to ensure that we prepare every child for the best outcome possible.
Yep.
So if there are children that struggle with issues that prevent them from being able to attend college, it's our responsibility as educators to make sure they have all of the skills they need to do as much as possible. So if a child suffers from anxiety, a lot of that, if they're only in eighth grade, we shouldn't be thinking about writing them off for college when they're only in eighth grade. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of learning and a lot of developing to do, and we have a lot of time to offer them the supports that they need to control whatever it is that's troubling them. Okay. If it's anxiety, the school's responsibility is to teach them this self-regulation skills to be able to handle their anxiety.
Okay.
That's their job. It's not all academic. Special education includes emotional disabilities.
Oh, that's great that you brought that up. I'm glad you said that.
Yes, it does. So if a child is struggling because of anxiety, because of perhaps they lack the needed supports at home, there's nobody available to them. Maybe they have single parents that work so much that they're not available to the children. Those children may be struggling and they're entitled to services to help them learn.
Got it. All right. Thank you for sharing that. And what else, Kate, did you want to share with us today? We still have 5 minutes left in the show. Just want to make sure we're covering everything that's important to you.
I think that one of the things that is helpful for everybody to understand is that special education is law. They have the right to require, school districts have the right to require parents to be involved. And if they don't, school districts have the right to take steps, if the parents are not doing so, to be able to take steps to ensure that child is getting what they need. The same is true for parents. If parents feel their child isn't getting what they need at school, they have the right to tell the school district, I need this for my child. And the school district has to respond to that. They can't ignore it. So even if the school district decides, oh, it's only cutting and scissor work, and so the child doesn't need extra help. Say you were a parent that was really worried about that instead. Say you were super focused on it and you were so worried that your child wasn't cutting correctly at whatever age it is, just because you never handed them scissors, who knows? Yeah. The school district might then say, no, we see them in all other areas and they're not struggling in any other area. And I think they just haven't held scissors enough.
Yeah.
So that's when the school district can say, let me try teaching them cutting things. And I'll have them cut a lot more often in school. And maybe you can try to have them cut at home too.
Yeah.
And that way, that's how you find out if a child really needs more help. If a child has a disability with cutting, that's called a fine motor disability, then yes, they need help. But if it's just that they haven't cut enough, let's have them cut some more.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to know there's these types of services out there for so many of us that need and these children. So, and, we appreciate what you do. Now, are you working specifically in your state or you do virtual work for the courts and for different districts across the country?
Yes. Most of my work actually is taken up with attorneys. There's a lot of litigation that happens, and that's when they need an expert, or by school districts. So yes, that's the most work that I do is on a large scale rather than an individual scale, just because when you amass the amount of expertise, it's in demand.
Yeah. All right, good. And in closing today, Kate, what do you want to leave for our listeners?
Children with special education are smart, funny, bright, wonderful, and should be included. I think that's it.
Absolutely, all inclusive. You know what? And it's great to hear that, because now my sister also works as an aide in the special education department, not for her son, but in the elementary school that we went to. So she's working with students that need extra help. And I've learned so much from her about it. My eyes have opened. And then having her son with the special needs. And it's like, wow. You know, when I was younger, I never looked at it that way. I didn't know about this. So it's so nice to see that, hey, I don't think years ago when I was in high school, this even existed, this special education, right? It's right. I mean, 20 years ago, did this really exist the way it does today?
We didn't have special education. It didn't start to be discussed until the 70s.
Yeah.
We have special education in schools. We had special schools.
Yes. So I love this because you're more inclusive, and it really is. And every child, every person is just as special, just as valuable, just as precious. So thank you, Kate, for doing what you do. How can our listeners and viewers reach out to you?
They can call me. They can call me by phone. My telephone number is 603-828-7961, or they can reach me at squarepeged.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. You have a fantastic day. And thank you for doing what you do, especially for those children, Kate. Have a good day. Yeah, everyone else the same. Stay tuned. More of the show is on the way. Don't go anywhere.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.